So for my birthday back in April, my son Charlie gave me a really cool gift. It was a membership to 23andMe. Now, using your DNA, 23andMe reveals your genetic family tree. It helps you learn about your past and all the connections you have to other people who are living today. Now, when you sign up for 23andMe, they send you a plastic vial that you have to fill up with your saliva. Doesn't sound hard, but it's a very big vial, and yes, it's kind of gross. But once you fill up the vial, you seal it up in a special package, you mail it in, and after a couple weeks, you get a DNA report back, and you begin discovering where in the world your ancestors came from, what country or region, and you discover people all around the US and the world you're related to right now, this huge network of connection. And it's all voluntary. You only give out as much personal information as you feel comfortable doing. You can contact them, they can contact you. I learned, for instance, that I have a third cousin I never knew about who lives in San Francisco. And on his 23andMe profile, he seems like a really nice guy. I think he even looks a little bit like me. And I'm hoping he doesn't mind us just dropping in for a couple of weeks. Look, we have the same male pattern baldness. I've always wanted a relative in San Francisco. But through my 23andMe DNA report, it was really no shock to learn that I'm 99.9% Northern European, mostly Scottish and English and Irish, which I guess explains why I'm really into watching all of those mini-series about the Queen. Anything on BBC, I'm in. But the larger truth of 23andMe is that although it's true that my most recent ancestors were white Europeans, if you go just a little further back in time, it tells a DNA story about a much bigger reality, about all of humanity. It's amazing to see just how connected that we all are. It affirms that while we may have some relatively minor distinctions that affect how we appear on the surface, the scientific truth is that physically, genetically, and I believe spiritually, there's barely any space at all that separates us. And whatever space there is between us is really just in our hearts and minds. There are some passages in the Bible that have the power to make me cry like a baby. And Romans 8:35 through 39 is one of those. Nothing, it says, absolutely nothing, can separate us from God's love. It is beautiful. It's not uncommon for this passage to be read at funerals, and one of my greatest honors that I perform in my line of work is to officiate at funerals. It's a dynamic of being present for a grieving family and understanding their needs and hopefully helping them journey through their grief, while at the same time being very alert to my own stuff. And my own stuff is my own grief. All of the losses that I've been through, all the moments when I've been afraid and lonely and hopeless. Being human means that we all have moments when we feel afraid, lonely, and hopeless. It's part of living. That's why that passage feels so universal. We all seek purpose, hope, and connection. And Paul is claiming that the love of God through Christ Jesus is the universal element that makes all of those things possible. Now, that love can take many forms, but Paul really nails it when he describes it as being something that we cannot separate ourselves from, even if we tried. It links us together like a family. And it's a far greater reality than the things we construct that keep us separated from each other. It's about relationship. For sure, our relationships with people we're connected to on a personal level, but it's also the truth that we belong to something much bigger than our little selves. It's the kinship we know we have with our ancestors, so it's about our past. It's the connection we have with our descendants who are not yet born, so it's also about the future. And it's the inescapable, interwoven nature of the relationship we have with all of the rest of humanity right now. A few weeks ago, I went to Michael's, that arts and crafts store, and there was this little project I was working on, and that was the only place I could think of that would have what I needed. This stuff that's called foam core board. You can make lots of stuff out of it. But stores like Michael's are really foreign to me. I'm not a very crafty person. I don't do scrapbooks or sewing or painting. So when I walked in, I was completely lost in that space. But then I happened to see a woman, another customer, carrying exactly what I was looking for, a piece of foam core board. Now, everyone in the store was wearing face masks and practicing social distancing, so I kind of yelled at her, "Excuse me, do you mind telling me where you found that?" And she told me where to look, what aisle to look on, and I found it. And then I went to the checkout line. But then I heard a voice behind me, and it was that woman. She said, "Do you have the coupon? It's 20% off." And she held out her phone to show me a coupon that was on her screen. And she told me to go to the Michael's website on my phone, and she showed me how to find the coupon. And I did. I thanked her, and I said to her, "So can you go shopping with me everywhere?" And we both laughed. You know, it was no big deal, just a little moment. Two strangers in an arts and crafts store, both needing foam core board. But I realized later on that there was a lot to that encounter. She didn't need to help me. Why should she care if I got 20% off? But you know, she did help me twice. And I am a middle-aged white guy. She was an ethnically Asian woman. We were both wearing face masks and standing 6 feet apart because there were these little circles stuck on the floor telling us where we should stand. But we looked at each other in the eye. We connected. We laughed. And I realized, as subtle and seemingly insignificant as that was, that I am connected to that person. I don't know if we'll ever meet again. If we did, I don't know how we'd even recognize each other. And maybe that's why it sticks in my memory. Because even with the distancing and even with the face masks, we both understood each other as worthy of our mutual time and attention and sharing. As human beings, we were connected. And even if we never meet again, we're still connected. The thing is, before I ever went into that Michael's that day, we were already connected. And especially because I remember her and I'm telling this story, my connection with her is even stronger. My encounter with her was just a microcosm of the much larger truth that's a little mind-blowing. If I'm connected to that person, then I'm connected to every person. My 23andMe DNA report says I'm mostly Northern European, and her report would most likely say her ancestors came from a particular province somewhere in China. But we know that if we go back far enough to a time way beyond recorded history, that we all share a common ancestor from somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. So in the big picture of humanity, we're really all just leaves dangling from different branches of the same family tree, the tree of life. So that's nice, but why is it the least bit important? And what does it have to do with believing that we're never separated from the love of God? Well, I think it has everything to do with that. Because that love is the sap that's flowing through our human family tree. I know I've had many encounters with God, with that love Paul talks about, the love that we're never separated from. And for me, those encounters have consistently been through the presence of another human being, when I have been awakened to my connection with them. And I think that's exactly what Jesus embodied so perfectly. God's presence, God's compassion, God's wisdom, God's healing, God's self-giving love. And it was all right there in a flesh and blood person. A person who had every human emotion, the same fears, the same loneliness, the same temptations, the same courage, the same grief, the same hope, the same sadness, and the same joy as any one of us. Otherwise, Jesus would not have been fully human. It's important to remember that, I think. And to remember that because Jesus was the very embodiment of love, that we have been shown what it means to be fully human. It's to know how connected we truly are to one another across space and time, connected by love, and to act like that's true. Too often, though, we lose sight of that. We start to believe that being separated from each other is just the normal nature of things. We've been taught that insignificant differences are what truly defines us. Things like the color of someone's skin, or their sexual orientation, or the language they happen to speak, or the place they were born, or how much money they have in the bank, or their gender, or their level of formal education, or their age, or their physical or cognitive ability, or the flag that waves above the country that they call home, or the religious belief that beats in their heart, or perhaps no belief at all. We have been taught that those minuscule differences are really big. They're like heavy weights on a scale to determine the value of one human life compared to another. That all of those things we use to define ourselves then means that there's a hierarchy to who is more worthy, and that we're naturally more separate, more alike, more alien than we are alike. But that is a lie. It's a lie because nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Nothing. The differences that we create between people of every race, creed, and color, who are the living embodiment of God's love, those differences are so laughably tiny, they are nothing compared to the majestic, interwoven love that truly binds us to one another. Have you ever been to a nursery or a preschool and watched how little children, kids who have yet to learn to be afraid of people who look and sound different from themselves, have you ever watched them, how they play together, how they run and laugh together with joyful, unself-conscious abandon, and how when they might even get cross with one another over a toy or over territory in the sandbox, that they can still figure out how to share, and that they will give each other a hug. How when one of them falls and gets hurt, another will go to that hurt one and attend to them. If you've ever seen that, you've witnessed the truth of what humanity is really about. You've seen that connecting love that nothing can separate us from. But that truth is too quickly obscured by being taught that it's necessary to feel insecure. Think about it. No one is born feeling unsafe or insecure or disconnected. That is learned behavior. So we grow up to build institutions and we enact policies to create our sense of security. We create differences like race or our country or our team or our tribe or our political party or our religion. We grow to believe that us against them is just the natural way the universe operates. But you know what? The Apostle Paul calls that nonsense. He calls it nothing. Paul didn't know about DNA, but he did know that the love of God that connects us all means that any us against them, any fear or distrust of another person based on a perceived difference, that's a delusion. The reality is love. The reality is that we are bound together, that we're all related, connected, and that we all share a common destiny. So that when any of us are hurting, grieving, afraid, or lonely, we all hurt. And when anyone suffers a wrong, an injustice, or an injury, we are all responsible for making it right. When I first got my 23andMe results, I discovered I had another third cousin. This one living in Brooklyn. So I looked at his profile. It didn't say much, but he's about my age. What struck me initially, though, was his photograph. He's a black man. I was considering reaching out to both of those third cousins, the one in San Francisco and the one in Brooklyn, to see if they would be interested in connecting with me. But then the reality of COVID drew my time and attention elsewhere, so I didn't think too much about 23andMe for a while. I still haven't reached out to either of them yet. And when I do, I don't know if they'll even respond. I really hope so. I want to know about them and about their lives. I want to celebrate any connections I have and grow more alert to the truth and live into the reality that I am connected with all people everywhere, and to think of them and treat them accordingly as my sisters and brothers. I want to affirm the truth that nothing can ever separate us from one another and from the love of God that flows through the tree of life. And I want to do my part. I want to wake up more and more to see that love and to live in that love and to be joyful in that love and work hard to embody that love that connects me to you and to every member of our human family.